So now we're going to watch the next part. This is vanilla seed pods.
When we talk about vanilla beans or seed pods, it's important to keep in mind what this part of the plant is. Inside of a seed pod are the plant's seeds, and the seeds of any plant are just like babies. They're plant babies. It sounds funny to say it that way. We don't often put the word plant and baby next to each other. But seeds really are plant babies. Once the seeds are planted, they'll grow up into adult plants. So again, your vanilla plants, they grew well and they grew flowers. But as you learned, the flowers are supposed to eventually shrivel up and become vanilla seed pods. That never happened. Watching the video of vanilla plants in the wild, you were reminded that bees are somehow important. In the wild, flowers bloom. Bees are attracted to them, and eventually the flowers turn into seed pods. It's almost as if the bees perform some kind of magic on the flower, and that turns the flower into seed pods. What is it that bees do? Well, notice how it's the center of a flower that the bee is interested in. It crawls down in there. That bee is in there for a few seconds, and then it comes back up and flies away. When a bee does this, it comes out all covered in this yellow powder. Do you see that? This yellow powder is what we call pollen. Notice that the reason the bees are getting covered in pollen is because as they climb down onto the center part of the flower has all these pollen dusters surrounding the center. You see the yellow pollen at the tops? The bees bump into those pollen dusters in order to get to where they're going. So the bees wind up getting really coated in pollen. There's a second part of the flower center to notice, and that's this thing right here in the middle, sticking up above the pollen dusters. It's this knob-like thing. Now, if you touch the end of this knob, you'll feel that it's sticky. It doesn't matter what kind of flower you have. If you look at the middle of any flower, there's always a knob-like thing that's poking above the pollen dusters, and it feels very sticky to the touch. Scientists call this sticky knob the stigma. It might be helpful for us to remember it as the sticky stigma. So as bees are flying in and out of a flower, not only are they getting covered in pollen from the pollen dusters, but they're occasionally bumping into the sticky stigma. And so some of that pollen gets stuck to the stigma. Scientists noticed all this and wondered if maybe that's the reason that flowers will drop their petals and then a seed pod will begin to form. Is there something important about pollen getting stuck to the sticky stigma? One scientist got curious and did an experiment in a greenhouse, taking some pollen from one flower and going around and dusting the sticky stigmas himself, instead of having bees do it. Sure enough, now the flowers dropped their petals and seed pods grew. So in order for seed pods to grow, there's an important process involved. The sticky stigma in the center of the flower needs to get pollen on it. This process of pollen needing to get on the sticky stigma in order for seeds to form, scientists named it pollination. Take a moment now. See if you can spot these two important flower parts, the pollen dusters and the sticky stigma, on some different kinds of flowers, like flowers you might find where you live.
So unfortunately, it's not springtime yet, but you might have some flowers around your house, or in the coming weeks, you might notice some new flowers sprouting up out in your yards, and you can look for the sticky stigma, and you can look for the centers of these flowers. So let's look at this picture. It says, can you find the pollen dusters and the stigma on this flower? Now, if we go back to your questions, and pay no attention to these dates because they're going to change because of the snow dates, but it says, now that you know the stigma needs pollen on it in order for the seed pod to grow, what can you do in your greenhouse to help? Remember what the gardener did when he took the pollen from one flower and dusted it on the other? That's what you're going to write. So in your own words, talk about how you can be the pollen duster. It's like you're pretending to be the bees if you're in a greenhouse. All right, we're going to go back and whoops, here we go. Can you find the pollen dusters and the stigma on this flower? Look carefully. Do you see them right here? And where are the pollen dusters and the stigma on this flower? Right in the middle. The sticky part in the middle to catch all the pollen. Now that you know the stigma needs pollen on it, in order for the seed pod to grow, what can you do in your greenhouse? So this is the question that you're going to answer when you look back at your slide for today. And then that's it. All right, friends, have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Now you're going to go to the next slide in the slideshow, and you're going to complete your work. You can do it. Learn a lot.